Hi, and welcome back under my bed. This is episode 2, I guess. Today, I'm going to be talking about all my mental problems, all my mental illnesses. I'm going to try and stick to things that I have a relative confidence that I'm pretty much 90% or more certain that I actually have. Meaning, I won't be talking about autism in this, because I'm not sure that I actually am autistic. Who knows? Not me is the answer to that question. No one actually. No psychiatrist knew if I was autistic. No one knows. Schrodinger's autism. Schrodinger's tism. But I'll be sticking to things which I have either been diagnosed with or am virtually 100% sure that I have. Like, it's so obvious that I don't even need a diagnosis for it. So let's start off with the most obvious one. The most fun. The classic. The OG mental illness. Depression. Now, this I have been diagnosed with. Although the doctor, whatever they're called, clinical psychiatrist, clinical psychotherapist, I don't remember. Let's just call him a psych. The psych that I went to was not into labeling things. He didn't particularly want me to get an official diagnosis of a lot of these things, because he thought that if I had, which is, I can understand the logic, since I was in the system called CAMS, which is the Child and Adult Mental Health Service. So while I was in CAMS, he wanted me not to get a diagnosis, which I can understand, because if you get told, like, okay, you are depressed as a child, even though I was like 16, so I don't know, I'm still a child, but yeah, if you get told you are depressed or you have anxiety at that age, it can kind of actually make it worse or something along those lines, so I can understand the logic behind that. But either way, he wasn't super into giving official diagnoses or referring to these things as what they are. Like, he would never say, so how's your depression, mate? He would say, so I hear you've been having a low mood lately, or something along those lines. So depression is relatively easy to understand, I guess. But the way I generally explain it to normies when they kind of ask me about it is, imagine if there's a graph or a scale, and 0 is a neutral state where you are not, like, just completely neutral, and then 10 is ecstatic, and -10 is incredibly sad. But most people's average normal state in their natural life hovers around 0, and sometimes it's natural for it to fluctuate up and down, but it generally hovers around 0 in like a neutral state. Well, depression is when, instead of 0 being your baseline, it would be like -4 or something along those lines. So then when you get sad, you get really sad, and then even when you're happy, you're not really happy, or it's muted. That's how I describe it. It's like if your baseline state was lowered by a few points. I think that's the best way I've figured to describe it. But that kind of, it's not really adequate, but that's a quick way to get it explained out there, right? It's not really, because there's like a big part of depression is the sort of emotional numbness, Like, for example, I shouldn't have done this podcast while I have a cold, because my nose is blocked. I sound like Squidward. Excuse me for a second here. So, emotional numbness. This is kind of a side effect of depression. That it's hard to really feel anything after a while. It's kind of hard to explain. I mean, I guess you can kind of gather what it means from what it's called. But I guess it's probably kind of hard to imagine what it's like to not feel anything. Like, for example, my mum's, not to get too specific, my mum's been going through some tough times lately. And, my mum's always a bit tough. Let's say that. She's a little bit nuts. Very emotional. I unofficially diagnose her with, not that I'm fucking in any qualification to diagnose people, but, I think she's got borderline personality disorder. She basically ticks every box for that. So read into that what you will. But anyway, so she's always been a bit nuts, even when I was young. And like, I've always had to comfort her when she was crying and stuff. Even I have memories of being like really young, like I'm talking probably below 10, like maybe 5 or 6 or something around that time, maybe even younger, and comforting her while she was crying. And then I would start crying, obviously, because I was a fucking child. But now, when she's like in pain or upset or something, it's not just her, it applies to anyone. I used to have loads of empathy for people, like to a detriment, to where I felt too much empathy, so I couldn't get stuff done that needed, like I couldn't do stuff that needed to be done, like cut off toxic people, for example. Whereas now, I find it difficult to empathize with anyone, because I just don't feel anything. When I see, I don't know, let me think of it. Okay, so the other day I was with some friends. This is quite a while ago, actually. This was last year, so this is not the other day. In December last year, I was with some friends coming in the tube, and as we were coming out the tube station, there was this homeless guy and this other guy who were like in a shouting match. The homeless guy was sitting down outside the tube station, and the other guy just gets pissed off and starts kicking the homeless guy in the face, like repeatedly with these boots, and then quickly like speed walks / runs away in the opposite direction after kicking him a few times. And then my friends were all like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on? And like freaking out, because this homeless guy was now like bleeding from his face and stuff. But I just didn't really feel anything. Like I was just like, you know? Or when someone's really sad or something bad happens to someone, let's put it this way. I don't remember the last time I cried. Actual tears. Sometimes when things get really bad, I'll have like dry sobs. Like I'll just be like curled up in a ball, like trying to cry, like almost heaving. It's like I'm trying to, like, no tears will actually come out though. Just dry convulsions and sobs and weird noises. It's very strange. It's very surreal, and I think it's also partly to do with the fact that I am dissociated very often. In fact, I spend the majority of my life in a state of at least mild dissociation. But I'll get into that later. So that's depression. Imagine if everything sucked. There you go. That's depression. Imagine if everything sucked. Alright, the second one, which I have been diagnosed with officially, is GAD, General Anxiety Disorder. This one's not very interesting to talk about and doesn't play as big a role in my life as it did when I was diagnosed, so it's sort of started as a general thing and then has over time specified itself and morphed itself into very specific but very acute things. But general anxiety, I still definitely have more anxiety in general than most people, which I guess would make it a disorder. But I'm actually pretty proud of myself for coming as far as I have with my anxiety problems. Especially social anxiety. I had big problems with social anxiety and I've slowly overcome it, but it's been replaced with a severe misanthropy. I still to some extent can't really make phone calls, it's terrifying. Or speak to new people, or that sort of thing. If I'm in a group of people, I can't talk in real life. On the internet I'm fine, but in real life, if I'm in a group of people, I can't talk. It used to be much worse than it was, where or I'd either just not say anything, or I'd just spurk the fuck out. There's some cases where it would literally be really to my detriment. For example, skipping out on job interviews and stuff and just telling my parents that I'd leave the house and make all the effort to fully intending to go there, dress up in a suit, make all the effort to go to a job interview, and then get to the place and be too scared to actually go inside and just wait outside for an hour or two and then go home and be like, oh yeah, they said they'd get back to me, and pretend I didn't get the job. I did that multiple times. My parents never found out. Yeah. I remember going to a job interview. If you know London, it was in near Canary Wharf. Went there, got to the building, and literally was just like, I can't go in here. Turned around and just waited for 2 hours, because I knew it was timed. The email I got said you'll be out by whatever. It was a big, a lot of people were coming. It wasn't a normal job interview really. It was more a bunch of tests that they put you through arbitrarily to see if you're allowed to get the job, with a group test. Everyone who wanted the job was to arrive at the same time, and they'd all put us, I don't know how it would have worked, but it wasn't I guess the interview was one part of it, but it was also I don't know. I never went, so I don't know what it was supposed to be. But either way, the email that I got said, arrive by this time and you'll be done by this time. And it was 2 hours or 2.5 hours or something. And so I got there and I was just too scared to actually go in. So I just waited on this bench for 2.5 hours on my, at first I was on my phone, but then it ran out of charge, so I was just sort of sitting there staring. I couldn't go back because I told my parents how long, when I would be finished. So I just stood, sat there. Yeah, that was not a good time. Alright, well, speaking of anxiety, I guess we should talk about my most acute anxiety problem, my most acute mental health problem in general. In fact, the probably the most severe, and aside from depression, the most detrimental, which would be that I have a very specific kind of health anxiety, aka hypochondria. So health anxiety is rather aptly named. It's an anxiety disorder specified on your health. Like, you think you're going to get, germophobia would be a subset of this, getting scared of health problems, being very anxious about health problems. We all know what a hypochondriac is, basically. That's me. Welcome to me. Except I have a very specific kind of health anxiety, and it took me a while to figure out exactly what my triggers were, like what it was specifically that would make, like, because I don't get scared of, like, I'm not a germaphobe at all. I live in fucking squalor. I don't even shower, like, for all the time. It's awful. Obviously I wash my hands and brush my teeth, but I'm definitely not a germaphobe. And I'm not scared of stuff like getting cancer. Like, I have this lump on the back of my head, which I don't know what it is. I need to go to the doctors about it. It's been there for ages. I showed it to my mum, who is, by the way, a nurse. So I showed my mum the little lump, and she said it looked like an ingrown hair, so I didn't worry about it. But I'm starting to get worried about it. And again, it's probably nothing, but that's not super worrying, because I don't really care if I get cancer that much. Oops. Oh no. What am I doing? What the fuck am I doing? Why did I pick that up? What's going on? I just started picking up random things on my table, and then realised there was a mistake, and put it straight back down. I just absentmindedly picked up this plate that was there, and I was like, why did I do that? Anyway, I'm not scared of those sorts of things, diseases, brain tumours, those sorts. But my specific type of health anxiety, well, first it was centered around my heart, right? I was scared that I was going to have a heart attack, because I get heart palpitations all the time, which is probably linked to anxiety, but I don't really know. Like, it's not always when I'm anxious. It can just be randomly. Like, there's no pattern to it. I would have noticed a pattern by now. There's no pattern to it. Well, I mean, it's slightly more likely to happen if I'm in a high stress situation, but they just happen randomly, and at this point, I just have to deal with them. But yeah, that when I started getting them, it freaked me the fuck out, because I thought I was gonna have a heart attack. And to some extent, I still kind of think that there's probably something wrong with my heart, and I'll probably die of a heart attack someday. But it's definitely better than it was. But then I realized, like, after thinking about it for a long time, I realized that the fear was actually basically my anxiety is specifically centered around dying suddenly from a health condition. I'm not scared of car crashes. I'm not scared of plane crashes. I'm not scared of cancers or diseases or illnesses or anything like that. Specifically scared of random body malfunctions that can just instantly kill you. The the top list of classics that I think I am going through are heart attack, stroke, aneurysm, that sort of thing, where there's no warning, it just happens out of nowhere and you just die. And I'm still trying to figure out, I mean, I don't think there's anything I can, like, I don't know why I think that way. I can't understand it. I can't change that little thing in my brain that thinks that way. Believe me, I have spent literally years trying. It just doesn't go away. I don't know why it's there. I don't know who put it there, and I don't know how to get it out. But that's the little bug that's stuck there. So I now understand where it is. I didn't for a long time, but didn't really know where it was, except that it was something to do with my heart. Now I understand it's specifically to do with dying suddenly, because oftentimes I think I'm like, oh shit, I'll be on the bus and I'll be like, hold on, wait, what's going on with my face? Am I having a stroke? Oh shit, I'm having a stroke, I'm gonna fucking die. I can't let anyone know that I think, oh my god, what's wrong with me? I'm obviously not having a stroke. Everyone's gonna look at me, I'm obviously acting weird. Everyone's looking at me because they think that I'm weird. But wait, what if this time is actually real and I'm actually having a stroke? Oh god, what am I gonna do? Oh god, my hands feel numb. Because this is another thing, probably the most terrifying thing about this condition, is the psychosomatic symptoms. See, when it first showed up and I was my heart was going to explode or whatever, Um, a big reason for that was the fact that I kept getting chest pains, right? Not like incredibly painful, but definitely there chest pains pretty regularly. And I was like, well, everyone says if you get chest pains, that's something wrong with your heart and you should look into it. By the way, I have been to one of the top cardiologists in the country about this and been to the doctors many times. I've had ECGs, I've had blood pressure tests, everything that you could possibly imagine. I even had like a device, an echo, I believe is what they called it, or something. It was like a device that was strapped to me with a bunch of suction cups, like something out of a movie, for like 2 days that I wore when I went to sleep, and it was measuring my heart rate, and they found nothing. So it's all in my head, but that doesn't. I still don't. Obviously, when I'm actually having a panic attack, I don't trust. I'm like, the doctors weren't right. They're lying to me. It's all a conspiracy. Or normally, maybe not that, but just like, doctors miss things all the time and stuff like that. But yeah, I was going to say something. What was it? I just interrupted myself and then forgot my own train of thought. Oh yeah, psychosomatic symptoms. So I kept getting chest pains, and my therapist at the time suggested that the chest pains might not be real, and I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? But obviously, after a while of having these chest pains and consistently not dying, I started to just ignore them when they showed up. Like, my chest would start hurting, and instead of panicking, I just was... If it happens all the time, you eventually learn to sort of, okay, this isn't a bad thing. Eventually, I just sort of was like, okay, I guess this is something that happens to me. And I stopped having panic attacks every time I got chest pains. And then, what a coincidence, at the same time as that, at the same time as I stopped caring about them, they also just randomly stopped happening. So I was like, oh, I guess the chest pains were just in my head. Apparently my brain can just make me feel pain right now. I didn't change anything else about, like, it's very obvious that they were fake. They were just in my head. I can't trust my senses. You don't know how much of a strange and scary feeling it is not to be able to trust your own brain, because it tells me lies. Like, when I'm on the bus and I think my hands are going numb because I'm having a stroke, and it's literally, there is nothing happening to me. My brain is lying to me. It's very scary not being able to trust your senses. So that fucking sucks. Welcome to my life. I feel like I keep saying welcome to my life, and people don't understand that it's a meme from that one Loiter Squad video where All Sweatshirt's like, welcome to my life. It's very funny. I keep referencing it, but I think people just think I'm saying it unironically. Okay, now we're past the stuff that's really obvious. Those were the really obvious and apparent problems. Now we're getting into the more obscure stuff, I guess. So I guess the most obvious of the more obscure things would be addiction. Yes, addiction is a mental health issue. The most clear addiction I have is to nicotine, which is a very common addiction, and not really dangerous or bad at all, but yeah, I'm addicted to nicotine. I'm coming out. I'm an addict, guys. I'm addicted to nicotine. Speaking of which, let me grab my vape, actually. Yeah, I started smoking like 4 years ago, because I went to a shitty school and there was like nothing to do at break times, so everyone just hung out in the smoking area, and people just, when everyone was smoking cigarettes around me, because everyone smoked at that school, so everyone was in the smoking area, so I just naturally went to the smoking area where all my friends were. Well, they weren't really my friends, to be honest, but whatever. And eventually people start offering you cigarettes, and eventually I was like, you know what, let me try it. And it took me a whole year of smoking every day at school, I've told the story before. I would smoke every day at school, because there's nothing to do, and then on the weekends I would be like indoors on the weekends, so I wouldn't smoke cigarettes, and I wouldn't have any withdrawal symptoms or cravings at all. So it took a whole year for it to start to where on the weekends I would actually start having cravings and withdrawals, and at that point I was like, oh shit, well, I've fucked myself now. So then I just kept smoking. Like, I'd just sneak out for cigarettes and stuff. I was still very minorly addicted. Like, I'd only smoke maybe 2 a day. But without them I'd start, having withdrawals, loads of anxiety and stuff. But I like the act of smoking, so I wasn't particularly... I'm still not particularly upset with the fact that I'm addicted to nicotine. I think it's a good thing. It's a nice little constant. It's something to keep me grounded, Also, nicotine is the act of smoking or vaping in my case now is it's a good way. It's almost like a mini bit of mindfulness. It's basically a breathing exercise. You should look into that. It's very interesting. That one of the reasons smoking actually relieves anxiety is not because of nicotine, but because it's a controlled. You focus on your breathing. You take slow and deliberate breaths, and that's a big reason that it calms you down. And just having some sort of routine in my life, I don't have any problem with it. Also, it's just an enjoyable thing, and the reason I didn't really care about getting addicted was because from the beginning I was like, well, if I ever get addicted to cigarettes and I want to quit, I'll just switch to vaping. And lo and behold, 2 years later, after I stopped being so social and became more of a sort of in my room guy, and obviously I can't smoke cigarettes in my house when my parents are there, so I just bought a vape, and then I would vape at home, and then when I went out with my mates I'd smoke cigarettes, and eventually I just stopped even smoking cigarettes and just went full-time vape, and now we're here. But yeah, I don't particularly feel any reason to quit vaping. I think it's, I don't care, really. It's fine. It's not as far as I'm aware, it's not very harmful. If it is harmful, don't really care. Ooh, look at me, I'm so edgy. It's not inconvenient because it's so easy to get hold of, which kind of leads me on to my next point. Now, alcohol I'm not physically addicted to. I don't get withdrawals when I don't drink, but I am almost certainly psychologically dependent. No, like to an insane degree, but I do drink most days, which is probably not what you're supposed to do. I'm drinking right now. But again, it's very easy to get a hold of, and who cares? Alcohol will probably kill me in 20 years, but for now, it's keeping me alive. It's stopping me from killing myself, so it's a good thing. Who cares? Who cares, man? Let me kill myself. Just let me do damage to my own body. It's okay. I don't drink that much. I'm clearly an idiot because there's a history of alcoholism in my family. History of addiction and alcoholism. My mum's an alcoholic, her mum was an alcoholic, and her brother was a heroin addict for a long time. 2 of her brothers are were addicted to something. Her sister has an eating disorder, which is kind of related to addiction. So it's really not a good thing for me to, it was very obvious that this was going to happen to me genetically. So there we go. That's happened. But it's not to the point where I have to be drunk to go outside or anything like that. It's not. I'm still functioning, as they say. I only drink in the afternoons and stuff, so that's fine for now. But it's probably not going to be fine in a few years. But then You know, I could get hit by a car tomorrow, so who cares? This is my common. I don't want to face the fact that I have bad habits that are like killing me. I don't want to think about that. Who cares? So other mental disorders. Now we're getting into some more obscure, not obscure, but like less obvious stuff. This I'm not 100% sure I have, but fuck, I think it's called cyclothymia, which is sort of bipolar disorder light. It's like a less aggressive version of bipolar disorder. The reason I suspect this is because I get manic episodes, which normal, just regular depression doesn't induce. But it's pretty easy to tell when you're experiencing. The first few times it happened, I was just like, what's going on with me? I didn't understand why I felt it that way, but after looking into it a little more, or just thinking about it a little more, I was like, oh, I guess that's mania. So mania is weird. You suddenly get loads of it. It's kind of like doing MDMA. You suddenly get loads of energy and you start talking about stuff that you would never talk about. And interestingly, my sense of humor changes a lot. It becomes really surreal to the point where it kind of scares people, because it's like almost indistinguishable from just rambling incoherently. But I think it's very funny when I'm having a manic episode. If you want to see an example of this, go look at my video. I think it's called "I'm a fucking genius. You people could never hope to understand my intellect." That's the sort of stuff that I will enjoy and find to be the funniest shit in the world when I'm manic. Have loads of energy, suddenly want to talk to people. Yeah. It's not super interesting experience, or I don't get it particularly severely. It normally only lasts maybe a day or two, or a week at most, but it is always proceeded afterwards. It always comes with a big low, which is what I'm currently at the beginnings of right now. So I just had a manic episode like a few days ago, and now I'm just beginning the descent into deep depression that always comes afterwards. And this is why I believe it's cyclothymia, because it's a clear pattern that happens every time. But I need to talk to a professional about this before I go diagnosing myself with that, but that seems likely. So next on the agenda is this is actually, I'm pretty certain I have this, but it's more of just a subset of anxiety. What's it called? Oh man, how did I forget the name of this thing? Agoraphobia. It's sort of the fear of being in a situation where there's no easy escape, because you're worried that you're going to panic or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what the definition is, but it's sort of like the fear of, for example, I don't want, like, it's kind of the reason I'm more like kind of a shut-in, because I don't want to go outside where there's no easy safety for me to get to if something bad happens in my brain. If I start panicking and I'm at home, I can easily, like, you know, I have loads of ways to deal with that while I'm here. I can distract myself with something that will put all that anxious energy into something else and drive it away from me. Generally, I've found that if I am panicking, all I have to do is distract myself for 15 to 20 minutes. So I have a bunch of stuff that I always think about. If I notice that I'm having some sort of panic, I can easily, there's loads of classic go-tos, like, okay, just play a video game for 15 minutes, or watch a movie for 15 minutes or something, or just play guitar for 15 minutes, anything to get that anxiety away from my brain, stop thinking about, like, getting into thought loops in my brain, and project that effort somewhere else for like 15 to 20 minutes, and then it will pass. But if I'm out in public and I start panicking, start having some sort of anxiety attack or paranoia, there is nothing I can really do to distract myself. I can try looking on my phone, but I just get distracted and start panicking again in my own head, and I'm fucked. So they're really, and also there's the added thing of there's loads of people around me who, especially when you're having a panic attack, really seem to be staring at you, even if they're not. So that's basically not hypochondria, agoraphobia. I believe that's what it's called. It's kind of terrible. I kind of hate it. I don't want to go to university because, I feel like shit. And what am I going to do if I suddenly start, having a really bad depressive moment in the middle of class, which has happened throughout my life, but it's happened in university as well. And, doesn't go well. It's really not a pleasant experience because there is no easy out. You're just stuck there, sitting there I fucking hate all of you and I really want to kill myself right now. You know that classic one, yeah. Whereas, hey, if I'm at home, I feel depressed as shit, well, let me just pop to the stores and buy some motherfucking E&J brandy and then sit down and record a podcast where I talk about my mental illnesses so I can wallow in my own sadness, and that makes me feel somehow satisfied. If you know that Nirvana song, I forgot there's this Nirvana lyric that really sums up a lot of my experiences. I forget which song it's from, but he says, I miss the comfort of being sad, which is very relatable to me. There is some sort of strange, once you're so used to being depressed, when you're suddenly confronted with not being sad all the time, sometimes that happens to me. I'm not depressed my entire life. Sometimes I have a month or two period where I just feel I feel normal, but you would expect that to be great and life affirming and be like, okay, this is a good sign, it means I'm not like this all the time. But actually it's the opposite. I start to question my very core being. I don't really know who I am without this little guy in my head being sad all the time. It's like, okay, there's no, it's not comfortable, but it's like some sort of stability, I guess. It's hard to explain. I think you maybe can interpret what I'm trying to say here, but I don't really know what that has to do with agoraphobia, but there you go. So that's something I'm pretty certain I have. And now we're getting into the stuff that only shows up once in a while. All of these, these things I'm going to talk about are rare occurrences, unlike the others, which are relatively consistent. These ones are just sort of once in a while it will happen, maybe once every 4 months or something, maybe even just one time a year or something along those lines. And I'm not going to use any sort of medical terminology or try and diagnose myself, because they're not consistent enough to say it's an actual disorder. But I'll just sort of briefly go over them. So severe paranoia would be one of them. Sometimes this is the most common out of these less common ones. It's, for example, I start thinking that helicopters, it's almost schizophrenic-like symptoms, although there's no history of schizophrenia in my family, and I don't exhibit any other schizophrenic symptoms, so it's unlikely that I have any sort of schizophrenic disorder, but it's more like minor psychotic symptoms, I guess. So yeah, helicopters going by, I think they're looking at me. People on the street, I think they're looking at me. I start to think that there's some sort of conspiracy against me in some aspect of my life. This happened a lot while I was at school. I thought all the teachers were planning against me. In fact, one time I walked into a classroom with 2 teachers in it, and I I heard the teachers like talking about how they were gonna purposely fuck with me. I don't remember exactly what they said, and I don't know if they actually said it, because another part of this, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about, is random hallucinations. These are very inconsistent and quite rare, but they definitely happen. I get the hallucinations of pains and stuff like that from my health anxiety, but I also get other unrelated hallucinations. The fun ones are stuff like shadow people showing up in my room at night time, or visual distortions like on an LSD come up, where the walls start breathing or patterns start swirling or things like that. Those are actually kind of regular. Maybe I'll get those like once every couple of months. I'll have a night where I start seeing walls moving and stuff like that. But shadow people I've only seen maybe a couple times in my lifetime, but they seem chill. I kind of want to meet up with the shadow people and hang out with them, because they just sort of stand there in the doorway or down the hall or something like that, and they just sort of stare at me, and I'm like, oh, you're right, mate. They're not scary. I mean, there's a little like jolt, a little heart skip when you see someone standing there where there's not supposed to be anyone, but then they sort of like, they're not really there. They sort of live in some sort of alternate dimension or something. They're sort of phasing in and out of existence. They're kind of hard to distinguish, as if they're made of mist or shadow. But I'm pretty chill with the shadow people. Weirdly, when I've had sleep paralysis, which I've only had twice in my lifetime, I never see the shadow people, which is where most people's experiences with them come. And when I've taken diphenhydramine, I've never seen shadow people either, but I have just seen them randomly when sober a couple times. All this stuff happens at night time or when I'm sleep deprived. Yeah, the walls breathing and shadow people, those are fun. They don't do any harm, and I understand it. Oh, you know what I forgot to talk about? Dissociation. This is kind of a subset of anxiety as well, but when my anxiety disorder first showed up, I would get panic attacks mostly for three reasons. Social situations, which I don't get anymore. Well, sometimes I do, but normally it manifests itself through health anxiety. Like if I'm going to go to a social situation and I'm already in a high anxiety state, it will manifest itself in some sort of health panic, like I'm on my way there and I start thinking my heart's gonna stop or something along those lines. But before, I used to get panic attacks about those social situations. Panic attacks about thinking you're going to have a panic attack is a fun one. That's a very fun one. That's a great classic one. When you start panicking about thinking that you're going to panic, because there is no easy solution to that. There's no there's absolutely no logic to that happening in your brain, so it's out of your control. That's a fun one. But another reason I used to panic all the time when it first showed up was because I would randomly have dissociation. Deep. Okay, I don't understand this, because there's dissociation, depersonalization, and derealization, and I don't really know what. I think depersonalization is when you think you're not real, and derealization is when you think the world's not real, and dissociation is like an umbrella term for both of those, I think, but it's kind of hard. I'm not sure if I'm right about that. But either way, it's kind of like you suddenly I notice that I'm looking at the world through my eyes, or I'm like the world is just. It feels like the world is just a video game. Is a very good way of putting it. Or like my body isn't real, or the world isn't real. I don't know how else to like this. Is this like I'm somehow separated from reality. This is, when it first started happening, it would freak me the fuck out, because imagine you're suddenly walking down the street and then you suddenly notice that the entire world isn't real. It's very scary the first time, but it just kept getting more and more common. Most of the time people get dissociated, it like wears off as they get more used to it. But for me, it was the opposite. I just kept being more commonly dissociated. Like at first it would last for a few minutes, and eventually it started lasting for hours, and then one day it just started and never stopped, basically. I'm pretty much constantly in a state where I don't really think anything's real, which means that it kind of cancels itself out because it's not scary anymore. So it doesn't cause me any anxiety anymore. But it does sometimes cause me to say dumb shit because I forget that the world is real. Like, I'll just be having a conversation. It's like I have the exact opposite situation as I used to have, which is probably a sign that I'm really fucked up. Where instead of panicking because the world isn't real, I'll suddenly remember, like, oh shit, yeah, this is actually a real conversation that I'm having, and this is only going to happen once. I can't respawn or restart the level. I can't, like, this moment only happens for one time. I can't fuck it up. And suddenly panic because, oh shit, the world is real after all. Which is, I don't even know how to describe such a surreal experience. But there you go, there you have it. It's like watching the whole world on a screen all the time, kind of like moving through treacle. I think it's one of the reasons why I kind of might seem autistic to a lot of people. Because, I mentioned at the beginning that I think I might have autism. Well, one big reason for me to think that is because people constantly ask me if I'm autistic. I have this thing I call the 3 weeks test. Every time I move to some sort of new social situation, like start a new school, start a new job, or move classes or anything like that, it normally takes 3 weeks for someone to ask me if I'm autistic. And it's a pretty reliable test. It's happened every time I've moved things for the last maybe 5 years or so. People ask me if I'm autistic. So that's what actually made me start thinking, hold on, am I autistic? But I think the reason for this may be because I am dissociated in all conversations, or maybe not the vast majority. I'm not like literally constantly dissociated. There are times when I'm not, but it's very common. It's kind of a little bit like being drunk, so I think I just say things that are socially inappropriate or just behave in slightly a weird way, and to most people's assumption that's what autism is, so they just ask me if I'm autistic because it's just a little bit of a separation from reality to where it's very hard to put into words. I don't think words can really explain this sort of thing. I'm trying to think about, because I'm dissociated right now, I'm trying to think about what it feels like. It's almost like like piloting a mech or something. Like my body is actually just some sort of external system that I'm actively controlling, and the way I experience reality is completely arbitrary. Like I look at myself in the mirror, but that's not actually me. That's just like the weird vessel that I'm speaking in, and I'm looking through my eyes. But the actual me is like somewhere else. I don't know where the actual me is, but it's not the thing that's speaking to you right now. Like my vocal cords, I can feel them. I can tell that that's not me. My brain, I can have thoughts, but I can tell that sometimes those thoughts are me, but sometimes those thoughts are like separated from me. Like the thoughts that go on in the very base of my brain that tell my heart to keep beating and my lungs to keep breathing. Those aren't really me. I don't know, it's very surreal. I mean, it literally is living in a state of surreality, so there you go. There you have that. I think that's about it. I think we've talked about all my mental disorders. I can't think of any others. I'm pretty sure that's... I used to have anger issues as a kid, but I don't have that anymore. I really don't get angry. Sometimes I get frustrated, but that's a different thing, I think. I never get like specifically angry at someone or something. Sometimes I get a little bit, but like not to a point where it's a problem or disorder. It's just like a normal amount. and then there's like a sort of bubbling, constant undercurrent of rage at every single other person because of my severe misanthropy. But I don't think chronic misanthropy is a actual disorder. I think I'm just projecting. So I guess that's the end of this episode of Under No Thank You's Bed. I hope you come join me next time, because it's quite comfy under here. There's space for two, so don't worry.